Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing an ocean scene on this wooden panel. Now I'm not going to be doing it on this side, I'm actually going to flip it over and I'm going to contain it on the back. So let's get this open. Now these were just cheap panels that I picked up on clearance from Kmart, oh god, a couple of years ago, and I've still got a few left. So I thought it would be a great idea to use these for some resin. Now I don't need to do anything with the back to prevent the resin from flowing through, so that should be pretty good to go. You may get a little bit of leakage at the side, but I very much doubt that because I've used these before for resin and not had any issues. So let me get rid of my rubbish and I shall be back. Now I'm going to be doing a project which is going to contain some ashes. So what I want to do is, before I actually proceed and create a piece that contains the ashes, I want to do some sample pieces first, just to see how the cremains react in the resin, if at all, and the type of texture that I'm likely to get. I also picked up some of these stones from my local stone place, and some of them were on the larger side, so using a small hammer I broke them up into smaller pieces so that I could use within the board. I also, when I broke them up, just let me open this, I saved some of the broken pieces, but at the bottom I also kept all of the grit and I don't know if you can see that, so all of the grit and smaller pieces in the back, so that I can sprinkle on the top to give a more realistic ocean beach look. So what I'm also going to do, so just let me get rid of that. So what I'm also going to do is I'm going to use some multi-purpose filler to create the background, and then place the stones on top with the gravel and whatnot, so that we've then got a bit of texture. Now this doesn't actually take that long to dry, so this can be left overnight and then we can come back tomorrow and apply resin. So I'm just going to start adding some of this to the board. Now in the past I've also tried using this with some PVA glue. I've also used a little bit of water to mix it down a little bit, so to thin it down a little bit I should say, to make it a little bit more watery, but I've found that just using it straight out of the tub works best. I've also used some tile grout, which I have then mixed with water and sand to create a background, so that there's many different ways that you can do this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a layer right across the back of the piece. Now don't worry too much about whether you see some of the board behind, because when we apply the sand and the resin you won't see that board. Now normally using wood I would seal the board beforehand, but because I'm using a paste on a texture paste on the top, I don't need to seal this board. So I'm just going to get it on the board first, and then I'll worry about spreading it all over. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create some high spots and low spots once I've put the stones on, so I can see where the sand is going to sit. Now the reason why I'm doing this, sprinkling the sand on the top also, is that I want to retain the colour of the sand, because if you've worked with sand before, like I have in resin, you'll notice that the sand goes quite dark. So to retain the colour you need to leave the sand as dry as possible, so this is going to help by sprinkling the sand on the top. So using this square one now, I want to push some of this texture right up to the edges. Let me get in a bit closer for you. Wrong way. So what I'm doing is I'm just pushing the texture right into the corner so that we've got texture all over the board. So now using a spoon, we're now going to create some like ripples in the sand. Actually, using my finger works better, so I'm going to use my finger to create some ripples. Again, you're not really going to see these ripples, but it's just in case we do have any high and low spots, and when the resin self levels, you'll see that we've got some ripples in the sand. Now the top area here where the bottom area where the stones are going to go, I'm not worrying too much about that at the moment. I am actually going to add a touch more texture just because I want areas for where the stones are going to sit, and then I'm going to use a bit of water to just smooth those areas down a little bit. So now for the stones, just let me see it quite. I'm trying to find some interesting pieces. Oh, I quite like that one because that one's quite interesting with the shape. So I think I want to position this one into the texture. And what I want to do is I want to actually bring some of the texture up at the sides, so that it sort of blends in a little bit with where the sand's going to go. But I'll pat that down a little bit, and I'm thinking I might have another piece here, so I'll just add a touch to the back because I don't need a lot for this piece. And then I'm going to position it like so, and then using my finger again, I'm just going to just bring a little bit of the paste up. I'll just add a touch more there. Now in the past, when I've done some ocean scenes, I've literally just poured the sand in the resin, and then once the resin's been curing, I've then poured more sand over the top to get that lighter look. But I've never really gone into so much detail with trying to make it look a little bit more realistic. So I'm thinking that maybe it needs something over here as well. It doesn't have to be as large because this is the focal point. So maybe that piece there. So yeah, I'm thinking about there. So I'll just add a touch more paste to the back of that. Now when you're creating these pieces, they tend to be, there's no rhyme or reason to it, so you have a general idea on how you want it to look, but then it's not until you start putting it together that you'll start getting a feel for how it needs to, how it's going to come together. So there's usually no set plan with creating these pieces. It's more a case of when you position pieces, you then get a feel for where you want your rocks and things to go. So now I'm going to add some smaller pieces to just add some extra elements to it. And again, I don't want it to be just looking like it's just being plonked, if that makes sense. And then we're going to have some higher pieces around, and I'm going to use the spoon to just smooth that out a touch, because what I want is I want some of the water to come round in this area here and come round the stones, because this is where I want to apply some of the cremains. So I'm just going to keep adding texture and stones until I get the desired effect. Oh, I quite like the shape of that one. I think that one's actually quite interesting, so I'm not sure where I should put this. Maybe over here. And again, I'm just going, oh, that actually tipped a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to stick some underneath just to make sure it's got a little bit of something extra to grip. And then that way it doesn't get knocked off by accident. And then what you can do is you can grab some smaller pieces and just start positioning them. Sometimes what I like to do is just grab some small pieces like so, and then just start sprinkling them around where they fall, and then just set them into the texture paste, just so we start getting a little bit more of a rugged look. So I'm going to grab some of the sandy bits at the bottom and I'm going to just sprinkle them around. So some of the gritty bits in the center there, just so now you start seeing that it doesn't look like it's just been plonked on the top. So we're just going to push this round. Now my inspiration for this has actually come from a resin artist. Is she from Ukraine, and she does the most amazing realistic looking beachscapes. Now so the inspiration for the stones and everything has come from her pieces. So I'm not sure if she's got a YouTube channel, so I'm going to go and see if I can find it and link it in the description. So I'm not copying her style because I don't know how she's created her pieces, but the inspiration has definitely come from her. So I need some smaller, chunkier pieces. So I'm just going to keep going with this until I'm satisfied with the look. I do need a bit more texture paste over here because I want to add some more stones and things here. So I'm just going to add a touch more. Just let me turn it around so I can get to it easier. So I'm just going to add a touch more texture in here, because I want these areas to be slightly raised, because this is where my sand is going to go. So I'm just going to smooth that down a little bit. Need to get that more into the corner. There we go. So just smooth that over a touch. So it needs a bit more over here. Now I know I've covered over some of those gritty bits, but I will come back and add some more in a sec. So just smooth that down a touch, just at the back there, and then add. Okay, so I'm going to go back in now and just add some of the stones and the grit around the back here. Because that gives the impression that you've got some smaller stones submerged in the sand. Okay, so I'm liking the look of that so far. So I'm just going to pat that down a little bit, and now what I'm going to do is I've got some sand left over from a previous project where I do still have some stones and things in here. Now what I'll do is I sprinkle this over the top, and then once this is all dry I'll then tip it off to get any excess off the surface. So just using a spoon I just start sprinkling sand, and then using the spoon just to dab it in a little bit, just to get that texture in the background. Now most of this will be covered in resin, so I'm not worrying too much about getting it perfect, but the areas where it's not going to have any resin, I want the sand to sit on the surface. So when this dries and the sand is, because the background of the paste dries white, when the sand is stuck to it, it's not going to change colour. You're still going to get that light white sand look. Because West Australia has some of the whitest sandy beaches, and so I want to show that off in these pieces. So I've had a few people who have commented on my beach scenes in the past and said that my water was unrealistic and it didn't look good, but they clearly haven't been to Australia, because we have some of the most amazing colour turquoise water, and so I always try to replicate that, because anybody that buys an ocean piece from me, I want it to feel like it's a piece that they have got from Australia. Now don't worry about, I'm not worrying too much about putting sand over the top of these rocks, because when I tip this off, those rocks will then be visible again, so don't worry too much about covering them at this point. I just want to make sure that I've got plenty of sand on the surface, which I'll just dab down a little bit with the spoon just to make sure that it's binding with the texture paste. And to be honest, if after you do this and then you tip the sand off and you have some areas where you've missed, you can actually come back and just add a bit more texture paste and add some more sand. Now the good thing with the texture paste is actually fairly quick drying, so tomorrow this will be good for me to come back and do the resin. Now I've got little hairs and things in there, don't know where that's come from, but never mind. And again, once I've done with this, I'll tip this back into this pot and then this will get reused. So try not to waste any of the sand. Now I'm being mindful when I'm using the spoon to go in the direction of the grooves that are created, because then if any of that sand peeps through the resin, it's still going to look a bit like water. Sorry, the bit more realistic, and it's not going to look odd with an odd shaped line through it. And then I'm now going to leave this to dry, and then we'll come back tomorrow and we will add our resin. Right, okay, this is now hardened up, so it's time to remove the excess sand. So I just get a little tray and I just tip all of the sand onto the tray, and then I'll keep hold of that sand for the next project. As you can see, some of the stones and things have fallen off. So all I'm going to do now is, just using a soft brush, I'm actually going to take off all of this excess sand. Now you will still get some sand that will come away, but that's okay because we're going to pour some resin now, and this will help bind everything else to the board. So any areas where we've got a little bit of the excess stuff, I'm going to just remove that, just scrape that off. I'll sand that off. Okay. So we shall go and get rid of this. Now I don't need to position this on anything to lift it off the table because it's contained within the frame, so that should be fine. Now the colours I'm going to be using for the water is, where are we? So I've got a dark green in the FW inks from Dale Rowney, and I'm going to be using, it's a pearlescent ink, and it's galactic blue. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually mix those together to get the tones that I want, and then also mixing it with a bit of clear. Now the resin I'm going to be using is from Mad Resin, so which is a 1:1 ratio. Now I've got a little confession to make. I was given these resins all about 4 or 5 years ago, and I put them on a shelf and completely forgot about them. I had the intention of using them and never did. And then when I was clearing out my craft room, I actually came across them, and then I felt really guilty because I hadn't used them and I was giving them for free. So I'm going to try them out today, and I'm hoping that despite the length of time that I've had them, that they will still be okay and I'll still get a good finish. But this is a test piece anyway, because I want to test putting some cremations in there, so this will be a good way for me to test the resin, the cremains, and we'll see how we get on. So I've just discovered that my respirator has the rubber on the face part of the respirator has deteriorated, and it's gone really sticky and is no longer usable. So unfortunately I've not got a respirator to use for this project, so I'm going to just use this P2 mask for this project, and then I've got a new respirator on order, so that should be here very soon. So I'm hoping that you'll be able to hear me speaking with this on. So if you can't, I'll then switch to voiceover, so we'll see how we get on anyway. Right, okay, I hope you can hear me okay. So let's get started with measuring out our resin. So we're going with a part A, part B. Now the part B is slightly yellowing, but I've never found that to be an issue with any resins. I've used many resins where it was yellowing, because I always tint them anyway with a touch of blue, and I've also found that some of them, when you start mixing them together, they start lightening up a bit. So I'm just going to add those to the mixing cup. Now what I also like to do is, when I'm mixing the resins, once I've mixed these two together, I will transfer them to another cup and mix further, just so that I know that we've not got any sticky bits from the sides of the cup transferring to your resin piece. I know so far, even though I've got the mask on, I'm not smelling any fumes or anything, so we'll just see how we get on with this. So I'm just going to mix away. Now so far it feels very similar to the resin, which I've used extensively. In most of my projects I've used the resin. And one of the reasons why I was reluctant to try other resins is because I was a bit worried about how or if it would impact on my health. So because I'd used resin's liquid glass for so long without any ill effects, I was always reluctant to try a new resin. But now that I'm coming back to making some more resin pieces, I feel that now is a good time to try this out. Now this is not a paid promotion of this resin, this is just my honest thoughts on this resin. So it is quite thick. Now the temperatures it says is the room needs to be a minimum of 24 degrees. Now this room is currently 22, so I'm hoping that that's not going to cause too much of an issue. Now as you can see, it's lightened up quite considerably. from the horrible yellow colour it was. And like I said, I'm going to be adding some ink to tint it. So I'm going to distribute this between 3 cups as equally as possible. Now, I haven't measured how much resin I'll actually need for this project, but I do have some other pre-made pieces on the table which I'm going to use also. So rather than just creating one piece, I've got several on the go as we speak. Okay, so now I'm going to give this a further mix, just to make sure that that's well and truly mixed. Plus I mean this is the clear, so I am going to be putting a couple of drops of colour in there just to tint ever so slightly, and then these will get a little bit more. So my little dropper thing's no longer working on these bottles of ink, so I'm just using a little pipette to grab some of the colour. So I'm just going to put 1 drop in there, 5 drops, and then 10 drops in here. White. So I'm just going to give it a quick wipe. Now I'm not worrying too much about it because I'm mixing these colours together anyway. So now we're going to add a touch of the blue. So just 1 drop in there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Let's see how we get on with that. So that, I don't know if you can see that, that's actually making a nice aqua colour. And I'm not worrying about using different sticks for these because they are the same blend of colours anyway. So it's a little bit darker there. And then this one's going to be a bit darker again. Now on the wooden stick you can get an idea of what sort of colour it's going to look on the sand. So I'm quite happy. I think I might actually stick a little bit more blue in that because I want it to be just a little bit darker. And maybe a couple of drops there. And there's no rhyme or reason for this, it's just when I feel it looks, you know, as close to the colour that I'm trying to achieve. And the pearlescent ink adds a nice shimmer to effect with it as well, but you can still see through it, but just adds a nice shimmer. Okay, so I'm quite happy with those. So the first thing we want is to add our light blue, and I want it to come round near the rocks. I might need a bit more, a bit of clear just near the edges. Now see how the rocks are changing colour with the resin? So I actually want that to happen because I want it to make it look like the water is flowing over those rocks. So now for the next shade. Might need a bit more of that actually. No, what I'll do is I'll put blend. So it just pushes it back a little bit. And some more. And now for the darkest colour. Now I've got this silicone tip paintbrush, so I'll just use this to just move the colours around a little bit, just to get a little bit of movement happening and a little bit of blending. Now see how the raised bit of sand that I was telling you that I was trying to do yesterday, we've got a little raised bit there, so I want to preserve that as much as possible. So I'm just going to go and just push some of this resin into the low spots. So make it feel like the water has crept up. So I think it might need a little bit around this area. Now I do feel that I need a touch more, a bit lighter over here, so I am going to see if I can salvage a little bit more, see if I can get a little bit more resin out of here. But I'm being careful not to scrape the sides, I'm just taking it from the bottom, because I know that the bottom is well mixed. Yes, I should have saved a little bit of the clear, but that's fine. Lesson learnt. So next time I'll save some clear. And what you can do is you can actually pull it up slightly onto some of the rocks, so that the rocks are just a little bit wet in places. So it gives and these will remain wet even when, or wet looking, once they're dry, once it's all cured. Okay, so I'm liking how that's looking just now. So I'm going to leave this to cure, and then I'm going to come back with the white areas. And then what I will do is every now and then I'll just come in and as it's curing and thickening up a little bit, I'll just drag this tool just through the resin just to break it up a little bit, and this will just add a little bit of extra interest. So I'll come back every 15 minutes or so while it's curing until I get the desired effect, and then when we come to do the clear layer over the top with the white, then this will help bring out those reflections and things. So I'm going to move that to one side, and then I shall be back later. Actually, I'm back sooner than I thought, because I've remembered that I haven't added any of the Cremains. So this was my friend's pet, and she's very kindly given me some to try out before I tackle a memorial piece for a client. So I'm going to just sprinkle some of this into the resin, and what will happen is it'll sink to the bottom, and then you'll get it'll actually, because you get different coarseness of cremains and things like that. Now this one is not too big and chunky, however it's still chunkier than the sand, so we get quite nice effects. So all I'm just going to do is I'm just going to very gently just tap it on the surface of the resin, and I'm going to do slightly more around these areas where the rocks are, and you'll see why in a second when it starts to sink, because you'll see the effect that this has. Now it doesn't change colour like sand, I've found, so it's actually quite nice to put into, maybe a bit too much there, but that when that sinks, you won't see it so much. Okay, so I'm just going to first of all put the rest of this away so we don't lose any, and then I'm just going to give it a little blast with the heat on. Just very gently to just pop any bubbles, and this will help distribute those flakes. Now this resin is a little bit thicker than ones I've used previously, so what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to help it sink by just tapping and that will then start to sink. And you can use this tool to just help move them around as well, so if they're in areas that you're not completely happy with, you can start moving them around and spreading them out a little bit. and I really like how they look over the sand areas, because they look like a little bit like crushed shells, I've found. So I'd actually be interested in trying crushed shells in resin just to see what kind of effect that gives. So I'm just moving them out the way so you can still see that those little rocks that are submerged. And I'll just spread that around a touch. And like I say, there's going to be another layer of resin over the top. So this is going to help seal in any others that are perhaps floating on the surface. I love this little effect here with the sand. I think, you know, I think that's turned out really well. Okay, so now I'm going to leave this to cure, and then I'll come back and do some of the gentle white waves. Yep. So the resin ended up flowing over this little bit of sand as well, but I don't actually mind that because it's still got that nice beachy feel. So now it's been sitting for a little while, I'm just gonna pull this through a bit more, and just to disturb it slightly. I'm probably not going to do too much of that because I think it's looking alright as it is. So I think I'm probably going to leave that now and then come back and do the waves tomorrow. Okay, so it's the next day now, and I've decided not to add any white waves to this because I really love it how it's looking at the moment. With no waves, it looks more like calm shores. So because I did do one, I tried one out with waves on the top, and I'll be honest, I didn't like it. I actually prefer to do the waves in the colour as I'm working. And now this one is actually, I don't think you can see, it's actually sitting on the top layer of resin, and it's hiding the ashes a little bit. I mean, you can see the ashes. Just let me move the light up so you can see the ashes in the sand, sorry, through the water. But I'm just not a fan of these particular waves. And I think what it is as well is because this is concealed in like a box, you don't get overflow, and so by not having overflow, you get the resin wanting to repel against the edges and then move back in to the center. So it was a bit of a battle to keep the waves out towards the edge. So I think if it had been a flat board and running off, I may well have done it, but I think that it doesn't lose anything by not having those waves in there. I do love how the resin has created these dark spots on the rocks, so it looks like those are actually in water. And I was a little bit worried about the resin flowing, don't know if you can see the shine there, flowing over the sand area here, but to be honest with you, because I used a texture paste with just a touch of sand on the top, you've still got that light colour of the sand, whereas normally if you put sand in the bottom here and you poured resin, the sand then goes dark. And so I actually like that the sand has remained quite light here, so it's given some really nice effects on the shoreline. So here's a couple of others that I did. So I did a landscape version, and again I've allowed the resin to flow over the top, and again I felt it didn't need any waves. I don't know what your thoughts are on that. Perhaps you'd like to share it in the comments. And then just let me get the other one that I did. So again, the water, though the resin's gone over the sand to make it look like a pool of water. And I love how you've got some dark and light spots with the rocks here, and then again we've got the ashes in the resin around here, and I think it works really well. So I'd love to know your thoughts on this and whether you think it should have had some waves. Next time I am going to do some waves, but I'm going to actually do them when this resin layer is still wet, because obviously when I pour extra layers on top it's going to flow over the whole lot. So I need to experiment, but I also want to experiment with using some tile grout mixed with sand to see what that looks like with resin applied. But so far my favourite is the texture paste mixed with a sprinkling of sand over the top, because I really love how you can see those layers and textures in there. I think it's turned out really well. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video and it's given you some ideas and inspiration for your next resin beach. If so, please give it a thumbs up, or better still, subscribe to my channel. I will be bringing you some more videos, so stay tuned. So until next time, bye for now.